If you will, imagine with me. We're going to do scenes from an Italian restaurant, Lexington, Jewish style. Think back to the 1950s, when Lexington was a community of about 54,000 people, and all of a sudden, IBM comes to Lexington, and we become a big city, all the way up to 60,000 people. And we continue to grow and grow to the metropolis that we now are. But I have to tell you, as you imagine back to those days, the congregational sizes in Lexington were about the same size that they are now. In 1959 and 1960, when my father was president of the congregation Ojave Zion, there were 170 families. I'm not sure what the number is now, but when I became president, for the first time in the 80s, we had 171 families. I'm guessing that there are more than that now, but the growth has not been what you would call exponential. We have been, as we were then, a small and very tight Jewish community. So as I think back to those days when I was just a young boy, I think to the area of downtown first. Our synagogue that was originated back over 120 years ago now by the families of the Rosenbergs and Steins and so many others, founded our synagogue on Maxwell Street, an old church, and changed it into our Jewish synagogue, which was, at that time, a fairly Orthodox community, remembering that most of the people who founded the congregation and populated it and ran it for all these many years were from the old country and had their very Jewish, traditional, Orthodox ways. When we were growing up, our synagogue was still separated, men and women. And there was a center aisle that people started to mingle in. I can remember the days when the right front corner seating was all the elders in the community. Mr. Herman, Mr. Levy, all of the older guys were up. I've done the math, by the way. Those guys that were so elderly then, I think were probably in their 50s or so. But they sure did seem old, didn't they, Joe? Yes, they did. So every afternoon, in these days, every afternoon there was a daily minyan. Well, we couldn't always, all the guys who lived in the downtown area couldn't quite get to shul in time. So every day there was a 5 o'clock minyan on Water Street, which no longer exists, but it's in between Main and Vine Street. And we would congregate at a dry goods store that was owned by my cousin Xavier and Morris. And at 5 o'clock, everybody would hustle in. And the elders of the congregation would lead us through. Generally, it was Mr. Guller, the butcher, who was also our cantor in those days, or Mose Krosny, who lived nearby. And everybody would gather, and at exactly 5 o'clock, the minyan would start. And at 5:05, we were done. They would go through that so lickety-split that you didn't even realize you had been there. And for a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, that was great. Oh, I know what that means. Now, I was going to wave back. So that's how we were all congregated in that little area. So most of the people who congregated at Ohave Zion lived in the areas around the synagogue, which is on Maxwell Street. And they populated all those older, large homes on Pine Street and on Broadway and all around. And it was convenient, especially this time of year. Because as you'll recall in those days, the World Series was always in the afternoon. So we would go to services. Some of the ladies would go to the drugstore, take a break, but all of the guys would go to my Aunt Sarah's house, where Avie and Morris lived, to watch the World Series. And it was great. The memories, thinking back to how the entire Jewish congregation, the community itself, was so close that we knew exactly where we were going to be at what time. It wasn't always easy. Being a Jewish kid growing up in a small, then southern town, there were times when some of the old traditions in southern Lexington and Kentucky reared their ugly heads. And there were more than 1 or 2 fights after a football practice that the Jewish kid would get into, which is why I ended up on the debate team. It was a lot safer. And we had David Rosenberg and Joe Miller taking care of the younger guys. Those were the times when we learned what it was like to be the underdog. When we recognized what our place was, but it was being protected by that enclave, by that group of Jewish people in our community who created the environment, nurtured us, and protected us in our faith and our culture. A lot of things changed over the years. It was difficult, for example, to keep a kosher home in Lexington. And we did that in our home for many years. My dad expanded one of his businesses, and in it, he produced wholesale barbecue products. So I can tell you how difficult it was to keep a kosher home when your dad was running a barbecue pork ribs business on the side. My mom finally gave up. Instead of us going every Friday afternoon to Abe's Kosher Butcher Shop in Louisville to get our kosher meats, my mom came into the house, and one of my sisters and I were with a couple of friends eating a pizza with pepperoni. And my mom said, "That's it. No more kosher." So that's how it was in the 50s and early 60s in Lexington to be a Jewish kid. But I can tell you this, all of those experiences have helped make all of us who were there then the people that we are today. Proud, Jewish, Southern Lexingtonians who are still here and happy today. Thank you all. Will, imagine with me. We're going to do scenes from an Italian restaurant, Lexington Jewish style. Think back to the 1950s, when Lexington was a community of about 54,000 people, and all of a sudden, IBM comes to Lexington, and we become a big city. all the way up to 60,000 people. And we continue to grow and grow to the metropolis that we now are. But I have to tell you, as you imagine back to those days, the congregational sizes in Lexington were about the same size that they are now. In 1959 and 1960, when my father was president of the congregation Ojave Zion, there were 170 families. I'm not sure what the number is now, but when I became president, for the first time in the 80s, we had 171 families. I'm guessing that there are more than that now, but the growth has not been what you would call exponential. We have been, as we were then, a small and very tight Jewish community. So as I think back to those days when I was just a young boy, I think to the area of downtown first. Our synagogue that was originated back over 120 years ago now by the families of the Rosenbergs and Steins and so many others, founded our synagogue on Maxwell Street, an old church, and changed it into our Jewish synagogue, which was, at that time, a fairly Orthodox community, remembering that most of the people who founded the congregation and populated it and ran it for all these many years were from the old country and had their very Jewish, traditional, Orthodox ways. When we were growing up, our synagogue was still separated, men and women. And there was a center aisle that people started to mingle in. I can remember the days when the right front corner seating was all the elders in the community. Mr. Herman, Mr. Levy, all of the older guys were up. I've done the math, by the way. Those guys that were so elderly then, I think were probably in their 50s or so. But they sure did seem old, didn't they, Joe? Yes, they did. So every afternoon, in these days, every afternoon there was a daily minyan. Well, we couldn't always, all the guys who lived in the downtown area couldn't quite get to shul in time. So every day there was a 5 o'clock minyan on Water Street, which no longer exists, but it's in between Main and Vine Street. And we would congregate at a dry goods store that was owned by my cousin Xavier and Morris. And at 5 o'clock, everybody would hustle in. And the elders of the congregation would lead us through. Generally, it was Mr. Guller, the butcher, who was also our cantor in those days, or Mose Crosney, who lived nearby. And everybody would gather, and at exactly 5 o'clock, the minyan would start. And at 5:05, we were done. They would go through that so lickety-split that you didn't even realize you had been there. And for a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, that was great. Oh, I know what that means. Now, I was going to wave back. So that's how we were all congregated in that little area. So most of the people who congregated at Ojave Zion lived in the areas around the synagogue, which is on Maxwell Street. And they populated all those older, large homes on Pine Street and on Broadway and all around. And it was convenient, especially this time of year. Because as you'll recall in those days, the World Series was always in the afternoon. So we would go to services. Some of the ladies would go to the drugstore, take a break, but all of the guys would go to my Aunt Sarah's house, where Avie and Morris lived, to watch the World Series. And it was great. The memories, thinking back to how the entire Jewish congregation, the community itself, was so close that we knew exactly where we were going to be at what time. It wasn't always easy. Being a Jewish kid growing up in a small, then southern town, there were times when some of the old traditions in southern Lexington and Kentucky reared their ugly heads. And there were more than one or two fights after a football practice that the Jewish kid would get into, which is why I ended up on the debate team. It was a lot safer. And we had David Rosenberg and Joe Miller taking care of the younger guys. Those were the times when we learned what it was like to be the underdog. When we recognized what our place was, but it was being protected by that enclave, by that group of Jewish people in our community who created the environment, nurtured us, and protected us in our faith and our culture. A lot of things changed over the years. It was difficult, for example, to keep a kosher home in Lexington. And we did that in our home for many years. My dad expanded one of his businesses, and in it, he produced wholesale barbecue products. So I can tell you how difficult it was to keep a kosher home when your dad was running a barbecue pork ribs business on the side. My mom finally gave up. Instead of us going every Friday afternoon to Abe's Kosher Butcher Shop in Louisville to get our kosher meats, my mom came into the house, and one of my sisters and I were with a couple of friends eating a pizza with pepperoni. And my mom said, "That's it, no more kosher." So that's how it was in the 50s and early 60s in Lexington to be a Jewish kid. But I can tell you this, all of those experiences have helped make all of us who were there then the people that we are today. Proud, Jewish, Southern Lexingtonians who are still here and happy today. Thank you, Arnold.
17. I was standing I was on a busy street corner in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I had a 5-gallon water jug that was turned upside down, and I was playing it like a drum next to my best friend, Sam, who was my bandmate, and we were just doing everything in those days. Felt like we were sort of at the height of our teenage angst, I would say. It was like us against the world, is the way we thought about it. So we're sitting there playing music together and just kind of goofing around, having fun. There's lots of people around at the Ann Arbor Art Festival, big summer art festival. And before long, there's these guys that come up to us in these kind of long, flowy robes and these like funny haircuts, and they like invite us to go out into the street and dance around with them. They had sort of a religious feel to them. And among the things that we felt like we were like sort of outside of was certainly like any sort of institutional, like any religion, any sort of, those are the things that felt like we were outside of all that stuff at that time in life, especially. But nonetheless, it was sort of fun to go out there and dance with these guys. So we did that, and we danced with the Hare Krishnas for 5 minutes or whatever it was. And then I thought that would be my one religious experience for that day, but it turned out we put our instruments up, and we were kind of wandering around, and I saw across State Street, it was this person who I was pretty sure it was him, and it was this guy that I just loved, and it was like really important to me at that time in life. And so I wasn't sure, so I had to go look. I left my friend Sam, I ran over, and I heard his voice, and I was like, that's the voice. I know this guy. I love him. I listened to him every day on the news. He was an NPR host for Ann Arbor, and I thought of myself as this budding intellectual, so I was very excited to be like every day listening to his program. I saw him in person, and I just couldn't believe my eyes, honestly. So I just tell him, like, this is just wonderful. I asked him, how did you get here? How do I do this? This is the best thing ever. I love this. This is amazing. And he humored me, answers my questions, but I realized that it was probably, I was maybe a little bit overwrought the way I was approaching him. And he was very kind, but I got the sense that he got the sense that maybe I was bringing a little bit of almost like religious fervor and like pouring that into the wrong container at the moment. So, because I think at the time, 17 years old, there was some voice in the back of my head that was like, there's something to religious community, and there's maybe a reason that we've all sort of grown up with it as humans. We've grown up with this in our lives, right? There's these things, these institutions actually serve some purpose, and maybe we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. The generations that lead up to me being 17-year-old punk rock kid. So this is this little voice in the back of my head, and I totally don't know what to do with that voice at the time. But then, 10 years goes by. I'm sitting in my business partner's office and talking about his consecration certificate up on the wall. And for him, we got to be great friends, and just I remember talking that day and through many years of being friends and just doing all kinds of things together, that he grew up in this very tight-knit Jewish community in London, Ontario, and it was a super, I witnessed it firsthand. He told stories about it. It was very clear that this community made a huge difference to him. It was a really wonderful thing, all these families that, Alan, like you were talking about, where you just have these intergenerational bonds that really make a huge difference for everybody. And I saw that when I go to his wedding. I saw this through travels together, and that did nothing more than, if not make that voice in the back of my head louder. Still at that time of life, I wasn't exactly sure what to do with that voice. But then, 10 more years goes by, and I land here with my wife, and we have little kids, 2 years, 4 years old, maybe, something like that. And then that voice starts coming more maybe to the front of my head to figure out, like, all right, I think this is time. We don't want to, this would be wonderful at minimum for our children to be part of a community that really, this is something that they can grow with and grow into. I saw how that worked for my friend, my old business partner. All right, let's do it. But it's hard, right? We're, late 30s at that time. It's not exactly the most social period in your life. So we kind of poke around town. We try to figure out how might we make this work. And, we make some inroads, and eventually make our way to the first family Shabbat dinner at TAI. And again, we're not, exactly sure how to make it work. People were very welcoming. We ended up sitting at a big table with another family. It was like a parents and their kids and our kids. So, it's kind of what you'd hope. And we're telling our stories, trying to get to know each other. But of course, it's no guarantee. It's like, I don't know if there's necessarily going to be the magic. We all hope there will be, but it's, it's hard. It takes time, right? So the dinner winds down, and we have our little children get restless, as they do. They're little 2 and 4 year olds. They run off, and I'm not sure if this is exactly the right time and place for them to be running around all crazy, but then other little kids start doing the same thing. And it was, I was a little uncomfortable with it. I wasn't sure, uneasy. I wasn't sure if this was the right thing for them to be doing. But there was this really nice moment where this girl was just a little bit older. She was probably just 13 at the time. It was Denise Shackman, actually. And she corralled the kids and had the most wonderful, welcoming presence for these kids. And they they responded and they loved her immediately, as they still do years later. And it was such a small, important moment where it felt like, okay, this is the kind of thing that you hope that happens dozens and hundreds of times, right, over the course of becoming more part of a community and growing together. And then we got to talk to the parents more, and so everything just started to click. It was really wonderful. And over the years since then, we've done more of the things that help that along in terms of, you get involved like we all do, you volunteer in different ways, and it's turned out to be a really super wonderful addition to our lives, our kids' lives, and it's a beautiful thing. And now, if we have we're looking for a religious place to have a religious moment, we have that. And what I love about it is that it really takes so much pressure off of our local NPR affiliate, because even now when I see them at the Woodland Art Fair or whatever it is, it's like they can just go and buy their kettle corn, and I'll go buy the screen print, and we can get on with our days, and they don't have to deal with all that religious fervor. Thank you.
And I could say, Alona, hold on, you gotta help me out. How many candles do we have for Hanukkah? And she did all of this with love. And she was like, look, you can bring food over to my parents, but not a pepperoni pizza. And I was like, okay, all right, here we are. And Alona, by extension of Alona, we have met this wonderful community here. And I've met Alona's family. Alona's mom was showing me how to braid challah. I can't do that. I think I could do calculus before I could braid that challah. And I was trying to do it, and she said, oh, you'll be fine. You're doing good. You're doing good. And I said, really? And she goes, ooh. And then I was like, Laura, you got to come over here and look at this challah, because it looks like a hate crime. I mean, this is just bad. And that love and acceptance is, part and parcel to what I say is Jewish Lexington, Jewish community. And so I went from being a scared 19-year-old, just excited to see one of me out there in the world, so excited that I bursted out, to now Alona and I have been friends for 20 years, and she still looks better than I do. And so, Alona has been, is, and will be always my Jewish touchstone.
As Alona mentioned, I was state treasurer. For those of you who remember, way back in the last century, I was elected then. I ran for governor, and the people of Kentucky overwhelmingly decided that I should be in the private sector. So today, in the spirit of this election season, I'm asking for your vote. I would like your vote as Mr. Jewish Lexington. Now, I know I've got tough competition here, but I want to explain with my resume why I should be Mr. Jewish Lexington. And the fact is, there have been 6 generations of Millers that have lived and been part of this community. Generation 1, my great-great-grandfather, J.L. Miller, was the president of the Plum Street Temple up in Cincinnati. He wrote a little letter to a rabbi named Isaac Mayer Wise, inviting him to come preach at that temple, which ultimately became the Wise Temple and the foundation of the Reform movement in the country. His children, his sons, which were generation number 2, moved him down and their families down to Lexington, where they started the temple, and they opened up Miller Brothers, which was a store which was in the mid to last century where Festival Marketplace is. One thing remarkable about that was in the 1890s, they would regularly on Christmas Day bring Santa Claus into the store and give away gifts to 200 to 300 kids in the community, white kids and black kids. And remember, this was the 1890s, so it was pretty remarkable. The next generation, generation 3, my grandfather, I.J. Miller, was president of the temple, but the most remarkable thing he did was marry my grandmother, Beatrice. Beatrice, who I called Nanny, was deeply, deeply in love with her only grandson, and took me everywhere, especially the Winn-Dixie, and to her card games. But she would refer to me as her Christ child. And this isn't a one-off. This isn't a one-off. She would regularly have a Christmas tree at home. They were proud Jews, but that was a time where they had a Christmas tree. Well, not until my dad was Generation 4 came along, and by the time he was a teenager, he had gotten the Jewish thing riled up. And just like Abraham in the Midrash, you hear he came and smashed all his father's idols. My dad took the Christmas tree, threw it in the trash can. They never had a Christmas tree again. So my dad also channeled his energies into good things. He was elected the national president of NIFTY, the National Federation Temple Youth, the National Reform Jewish Youth Movement. And his big accomplishment was he helped organize and ultimately purchase property in Zionsville, Indiana, which became the Union Camp Institute, now known as the Goldman Union Camp Institute. Another remarkable thing that happened there was he met Penny Mullins, who he ultimately married, but they met at that camp, and so it was important to them. Now, this is not all good news. My dad's cousin Tom was raised Christian. His paternal grandfather was Jewish, but his dad was raised Christian, and so Tom was 25% Jewish, but a clear Presbyterian. And he married Kathy, his wife, still his wife, and Kathy's father was the president of Lexington Country Club. And during the 1980s, they applied to the Lexington Country Club and were rejected. And they were rejected because Tom, who was Presbyterian through and through, had a quarter Jewish blood. And this is my childhood. This is not that long ago in the 80s when that happened. Well, fortunately, when I came of age, things were turning around a bit. As Alona mentioned, I was bar mitzvahed at the synagogue, which at that time was over on Maxwell Street. Now, of course, there's a Joe Bologna's, and every time I take a guest to Joe Bologna's, I point to the bar area and I say, that's where I became a man. Now, I really, when I was a teenager, really wanted to become a man in a different way. And so I got involved in Temple Youth Group at a NIFTY, not to create a camp, but to go a camp and to finally find a girlfriend, because there wasn't a great selection of Jewish girls back then. So it took some fits and starts, and you might hear a story about this in a little bit, but finally I found a girlfriend, and 40 years later, she's sitting over at the table over there, and Lisa and I credit that to the Lexington Jewish community sponsoring me to go to Gucci, where my dad had helped found the camp and met my mom, and that's where I met my wife as well. So I came decided to come in and get involved in politics, and have three quick short stories of fun there. I was very proud about my Judaism and had a lot of friends who didn't know very many Jews, but were supportive of me. And I went to one barbecue, political barbecue, that was serving pork barbecue. And I had these great friends. It was a rural county in West Kentucky. They said, Jonathan, we know you don't eat this. Come on back. And I came on back, and they had a big plate of fried shrimp for me. So I had to give another lesson. But I was able to attend a lot of community celebrations. My favorites were going to black churches. If you haven't been to a black church, it is a very wonderful spiritual experience. So I took my youngest daughter, Emily, to one black church, and she must have been 5 or 6, and the music was great. People were screaming in the aisles, and Emily got in the aisles and dancing, jumping up and down, and it came to a quiet point in the service, and she yelled out, "Daddy, who's Jesus?" So later I took her to a Christmas party in Lincoln County, just a little south of here, and very proud of herself, and some person came up to her and said, "What is Santa Claus getting you?" And she said, "We don't believe in Santa Claus in my family." And the guy turned around and said, "Oh, so what are you getting for Hanukkah?" This is a community where there are no Jews, but this is a period of time in the 90s where I felt really warm and embraced as a Jew in this community. Unfortunately, things have gone backwards a little bit, and we, both of my daughters now, they're generation number 6, have moved back here and are involved in the Jewish community. Both have taught Sunday school. My youngest daughter, Abby, was teaching Sunday school one of the day when bomb threats were called in, shortly after October 7th, so this is in November 7th. So Daddy wants to do something about this, and I called up the governor, and I told him what happened, encouraged him to reach out to the rabbis, and I said that I know you've been talking about working on an anti-Semitism commission. Now's the time. Now's the time to do that. So about a week later, he called me back and he said, "Okay, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is I'm taking you up on your advice, and we're going to set up a anti-Semitism commission. The bad news is you're going to have to chair it." So I took him up on that, and we're doing some. I hope we'll do some great work with Mindy and others on that. But I'm confident we're going to get back to the day where we can be less concerned and more embracing of our youth, of our Judaism within the community. But the thing I'm most excited about is I can't wait till there's the 7th generation of Millers in Lexington. Both my daughters are married, and their father is trying not to push them too hard. But someday I'm going to come back to you, ask for your vote, and say I was part of a 7th-generation family here in Lexington. Thank you.
Or sing a song or read a moving meditation. That would be so wonderful to have this continued participation. I'm Lisa Miller, and I'm a recovering Canadian. Community is really my favorite topic, though, whether it's Canada, the US, or somewhere else in the world. We are all so deeply connected to each other, and it's so important that we are. Jewish Lexington, for me, one of my ultimately favorite places in the universe, though, is deeply connected with Jewish Mississauga, Ontario, where I grew up at Salel Congregation. We moved there from Montreal when I was 9. My sisters were, 4 and 2. And it was the first time we'd really been part of community. In Montreal, we were a multi-generational family duplex. So our great-grandmother and grandparents, uncles lived downstairs. My grandmother had saved all her tips from bussing tables at, I think it was Schwartz's Deli, where my great-grandmother was one of the main cooks. My grandmother worked the tables. My grandfather drove a taxi. And so we had each other. My aunts and uncles and cousins all lived down the street. During the diaspora, when they fled Eastern Europe, many of them ended up in Cuba, where my mother was born. Some of the family landed in Puerto Rico, Guatemala, but the Canadians who were with us around the block were our entire lives. We moved to Ontario, and suddenly we were part of a Jewish Reform congregation and a huge community of friends and extended family. That changed our lives forever, because eventually Lisa Morris would be talked into attending Goldman Union Camp Institute. You've heard that story before. At age 16 in 1984. And that is where this Jewish girl from Mississauga, suburb of Toronto, not even fully Toronto, we were the boondocks of Toronto. That was the only place where this Jewish girl could meet a bunch of new Jewish boys. And one of them was Jonathan from Lexington, Kentucky, who I could not stand. But we became friends and dated in 1986. And by American Thanksgiving in 1986, I was invited to come to Lexington, Kentucky to meet the family. The family was not only Jonathan and his parents and his sister, of course, and his Uncle Jack and Aunt Susan and Cousin Adam, but also the Shares, the Edelsteins, the Collars, the Rosensteins. Everyone came over to meet Jonathan's first girlfriend. It was so exciting. Of all the community mamalas and poppies, no one would have guessed Jonathan would have been the one to have a serious girlfriend among the team, among the gang in the community. In 1989, well, actually it was in 1988 in Jewish Lexington, where I was visiting for winter holidays, where Jonathan proposed in his dining room. And then it was 1989 where we celebrated our party at the Whitney Headley Museum. And we were welcomed as refuseniks because at the border, after we were married in Toronto, driving here, it was unintentional, but one of us didn't have the appropriate visa. And so at the border, when we were asked how we knew each other, and we held up our rings to say, we just got married. And they said, let's see your married visa. And we gave them my student visa. We were turned away. And we drove the 4 hours back to Toronto, and where it would take then almost a week before I could get an appropriate visa to enter the country. And when we arrived here finally for our wedding party, just in the nick of the time, under wire, like by, I don't know, 15 hours, there was a huge sign on Lakeside Drive saying, welcome home, refuseniks. And it was a big, fun topic of conversation. We moved to Massachusetts and DC. Never in a million years would anyone have guessed that Jonathan Miller would come back to Lexington to live. In the 80s, it just didn't seem like there was enough going on for young people to have a sense of community, for young people to imagine that if they went away to school, they would come back here and raise a family. But luckily, in the 90s, Jonathan thought it would be a good idea to follow his dreams through politics, and it was the Jewish community that said, we will vote for you, we will fund your campaign, you should come back here and raise your family. That was exciting because we had a 1- and 3-year-old. But what truly, secretly, was most exciting for me was that we would be only 3 hours away from Goldman Union Camp Institute, where hopefully my children would end up being campers and counselors themselves, which is exactly what happened. In 1999, I called my sister Fran, who was living in California at the time, and I said, please come to Lexington and help me raise the girls. We've been here for 2 years. I saw that it was such a sweet place to live and grow and enjoy community, and she agreed, which was really significant because this is exactly where she met her nice Jewish boy, Clark, and they have a 15-year-old. My children grew up with the best of community, truly, and the nicest kids. Lexington, Kentucky has the best Jewish boy population on the planet. When Emily and Tomer Eris were 8 years old, they were in my living room, and I said, what do you think you're gonna do when you grow up, and how do you see yourselves as adults with partners? And they said, well, we're probably gonna get married to each other. And I said, why is that? And they said, well, we want the same things in life. It didn't work out that way, but it makes me so happy to see Tomer's mother here. It makes me so happy that my sister is here and that I can take advantage of seeing everyone that I love and deeply, deeply like when I go to any Jewish event in the community. It was shocking to Jonathan and I that the encouragement to our girls, the little seed that we planted for each of them when they were in college that went like this, that it actually worked. It went like this. So, no pressure or anything, but if you can imagine your adult lives with your partner, and you maybe are considering having a family at some point, and you would like some sane in-laws to help raise your children, you should consider Lexington, Kentucky. And so everyone nodded. They both had partners at this time, or now their spouses. Everyone nodded. Yeah, that's very nice. Probably not. And then we added, and we'll help you with a down payment on a house. And years later, and we never pressured them, but years later, they actually took us up on it, and we are still shocked. Not only did my kids grow up here, but we, at age 30, in 1997, when we moved here, grew up here. Jonathan and I grew up here together. Community is everything. It's enduring, and it is something that I took for granted for a long time. I took it for granted because I could. How lucky are we to take community for granted? A community that is so strong and anchored and rooted in ethics and fun and love, and to be there for one another in grief. How lucky are we to take that for granted only briefly? I was attending a Lilith magazine Zoom facilitated by Rabbi Adina, who founded the Jewish Studio Project just recently. And she said, aren't we fortunate to be connected through time and space, through diaspora, everywhere on the globe as Jews, generationally? And it's so true. And when we look at each other, all of us here tonight, we see how true this is. And through Jonathan's story, I'm so grateful for what happened in Jewish Cincinnati and Lexington in 1890s. I pray that all of us get to benefit from those moments of taking one another for granted, only stupidly briefly, so that when we come home to community again, it's deeply home, it's enduring, and it makes us appreciate what we have profoundly the rest of our lives. Toda rabah.